This one's Susan. You've said it all loads of times.
Still some people coming in. Hello, welcome to the book launch of Kate Wilson's Disclosure. Before I start, there's a few people I want to thank. I'd like to thank the campaign and support group Police Spies Out of Lives for organising this event with the help of the Centre for Women's Justice in promoting it. Thanks to the National Education Union for gifting us this beautiful building, and to the Human Rights Fund for the beer and wine, and to you for coming for what I think is going to be a fascinating discussion. It is very rare that a phenomenally gifted writer should find herself at the centre of such a huge and important news story, and the upshot is this extraordinary and breathtaking book, Disclosure, which raises so many fascinating questions that I'm delighted that we have to help us discuss this and work our way through this. Co-panelists Eleanor Fairbreder and Harriet Wistrich. Eleanor Fairbreder is a core participant in the public inquiry and in the investigatory powers tribunal, and was part of the Sumac Center in Nottingham, which was the target of the Spycops sent by the National Public Order Intelligence Unit. And alongside Eleanor Fairbreder, we're joined by the acclaimed lawyer Harriet Wistrich, who has represented so many of the women through the courts during the Spycops trials, and who has written about the Spycops scandal in her 2024 book, Sister-in-Law, Fighting for Justice in a System Designed by Men, which has been longlisted for the Women's Prize in non-fiction. So would you please join with me in giving a warm welcome to our distinguished panel. Kate, can I, so I'm going to ask one or two questions to each of our panelists, and I'm going to throw it open to you all for questions and answers. Kate, can I start by asking you why you wrote this book? And why now?
I mean, I wrote this book after a long battle with the police, and after we won, to tell the story. And it's difficult to know, because there are people here I know who are core participants in the public inquiry. There are people who knew Mark Kennedy, and there may be people here who don't know that much about the story at all. But we were environmental activists, we were anti-capitalists, and we were infiltrated by the police. One of those officers became my boyfriend. He lived with Eleanor and I for over a year, and he hung out with us and infiltrated the movements and the social centre that we were involved in for 7 years before he was finally uncovered. And that uncovering was like a domino that brought out a whole load of other revelations about undercover policing and the secret political policing that's been going on in Britain since 1968. My book is just a little part of that story. It's a massive story, and there's so many different bits to it. But because we won the victory that we did, I wanted to tell it. But also, I wanted to make sense of it for myself.
Yeah, one of the things I most love about the book is you have this device of going from the third person catcher to talk about stuff in the past, 25 years ago. So we see it through Catcher's eyes when she first meets Mark Stone, as she believes is a activist involved in environmental issues. And then we flip from the third person in the past to first person Kate for the present, when she discovers that Mark Stone is, spoiler alert everybody, undercover of Officer Mark Kennedy. But I just think this succeeds brilliantly in the book. How did that idea, that device of going from third person to first person, Katya to Kate, how did that idea come to you?
Well, Katya, I mean, a lot of people here probably knew me as Katya once upon a time. I mean, that's the name that I went by back then. It's the name that I'm referred to as by the police in a lot of their reporting as well. And so it took, when we first started the court case, and there were 8 of us together with Harriet who started the court case, one of the main motivations that we had was that we wanted answers about what had happened. And it took 7 years to get, no, more than 7 years, 10 years. It took 10 years. We started, it took about 10 years to get disclosure from the police to start to actually see those files. And when I finally got the files, I found myself reading their notes about Katya in the third person and remembering those days and what I had been like and what life had been like before I knew. And there's something about finding out that so much of what you thought was going on in your own life was a lie that completely breaks your sense of biography and your sense of your own life story. And so for me, the kind of telling the story in the third person and the unravelling of it in the first person was about finding a way to heal that break, I guess, and bring the two stories together into one story, which is what the book is.
Yes. And another very poignant thing is when you juxtapose the Operation Pegasus police contact logs with your own lived experience, and that's incredibly moving, and it turns these very dry documents, which you describe as having to read as punishingly boring, having to read all these police logs into something very powerful. Eleanor, you were part of the Sumac Social Center in Nottingham that was targeted by the Spycops. Can you tell us a bit about what sort of place this was and what you were up to?
So the Sumac Center is in a neighbourhood in Nottingham called Forest Fields, which is a residential neighbourhood. And essentially, to many people who go through its doors, it was a community centre. So it used to have kind of kids' clubs on a Sunday morning. There used to be kind of... I used to live above it and we used to hear the piano playing, and which wasn't a favourite moment on Sunday morning. But it was a community space. However, it was kind of coordinated and organised by activists. So it was also a kind of activist resource centre. So it was somewhere that had lots of information, and it still exists, by the way, and you can go and see it. I encourage you all to go to the Sumac Center in Nottingham. And it's got lots of information about campaigns, lots of magazines, and it also is like a cheap place where campaigns could rent to have a meeting. But it was a social centre, so it also had a private members bar and a cafe, and it was all run by volunteers. And because we were anarchists, it was all organised non-hierarchically as well. And it's got a lovely garden. It's a sort of, the sort of place that within a community, lots of different people were using. So it was used by activists to organise, to socialise, but also by just normal people coming off the street who, may be sympathetic, but may not be very involved in campaigns, or who may just enjoy the cheap beer and propping up the bar.
Listening to that, and also reading in Kate's disclosure, I've forgotten about things like the Alternative European Social Forum, and it just strikes me that the events that you're describing and that you were involved in 25 years ago was such a different political landscape to the one now, in particular that it was so positive. It was quite internationalist. People were coming together, threshing out ways of dealing with the triple planetary crisis. Do you think that the desperate political landscape that we're in now has something to do with the targeted destruction of the type of politics and organisations that you were part of then?
I think that our story of kind of infiltration and manipulation of our campaign groups and sabotage of them over the years, and then the uncovering of what it did to our movement, which was huge and did destroy a thriving kind of environmental anti-climate change movement, which thank goodness has come back in new forms. But it sits within a much broader picture of police repression of political activists, and so yes, but we are just one part of that story, and we've seen in the same moment of these incredible victories of the women in the courts, the public inquiry happening, which is looking at many egregious things that the officers and the units did, not just sleeping with women, but targeting family justice campaigns who are campaigning against campaigning for truth and justice for their family members against the police, and a really broad swathe of terrible things that they've done. At the same time that public inquiry is happening, the government is bringing in the CHIS Act, which basically means that before the public inquiry has had a chance to look at it and cast judgment on what happened and what laws should be put in place, they brought in a new act which says that undercover police officers can basically do what they like and are above the law now. So rape, murder, anything is now fine. That's legitimised in that law. And then obviously that's only one small part of what the government has been doing since 2010 to attack protest, and it's happening more and more.
Thank you. And I'm sorry.
No, I just wanted to say, listening to Eleanor's description of the Sumac Center, that to get an idea of the completely distorted view that the police have on the other side of the looking glass of these things. There was an authorisation in the documents that I received that talked about sending Mark in to spy on the Sumac Social Centre, which used the term extremist 20 times in 4 pages. So just to get an idea of what they think, what they are considering to be extreme political behaviour, so that piano.
Yeah. Harriet Wistrich, Eleanor was talking just then about there being a broad swathe of terrible things. That must have made it quite difficult when they came to you to think about, well, which of these broad swathe of terrible things do I focus on for a successful legal campaign?
Well, I think, the women sort of came to me one by one, and by the time there were 8 of them, because originally the first sort of big exposure was around Mark Kennedy. Sorry, can you? And then gradually, and the police were sort of painting him as a rogue officer, and then gradually, more and more women who had some for many years lived with the belief that they had also been targeted in this way, were able to come together. So we had this group of 8 women from a variety of different backgrounds, political backgrounds, mostly political backgrounds, who all kind of shared the shock and the horror of what had happened to them and the desire to understand what had happened and to hold the police accountable. And so we kind of worked together as a group to try and determine, well, how can we get answers? How can we hold the police to account? And we decided that the best way of taking it forward at this point was through bringing a civil claim for damages. And the reason for that was because when you bring a civil claim, you as the lawyers and the clients are to some extent in control of the narrative, whereas if it goes to a public inquiry or the IPT or some other forum, it's them that are determining what questions to ask and so on. So the idea was really that we would drive the case. But we immediately hit 1,000,001 roadblocks, which Kate describes in her book, and I describe as well, in terms of the state saying you can't look at this, it's undercover. Just today been sitting in a similar case involving an MI5 spy, where again you see the intelligence services relying on the same story, but they're even more superior than the undercover cops in terms of this is national security, this is the state. Neither confirm nor deny, which was the big barrier that we faced in this. So we were sort of constantly kind of hitting up against all these barriers, and I think one of the tactics that we discussed in order to try and fight the case, because we were worried that the courts would just defer and kind of not we wouldn't get anywhere with it, was to find routes to bring it out more and more into the public and to use whatever method we could to get it out there and help really kind of raise concerns, and I think that was although initially I think everyone was a bit nervous about speaking out for very obvious reasons, I think gradually that sort of become more and more and enabled that voice to be part of the legal campaign, a necessary part.
Is there something about clandestine elite, self-styled elite police groups that encourages a certain type of belief that you might be above the law?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we obviously see that the thing about the undercover policing is that they, because they have the protection of NCND, because they have the protection of the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act and the promises that are made that their identities will never be revealed, it gives them, a cover from public scrutiny. And so in the case, we see that in the undercover policing case. We see this even, with the MI5, who seem to think they can lie to high court judges. And we see that, in these sort of horrific sort of elite units, like with the Wayne Couzens, David Carrick unit, they weren't a secret unit, but because they were an elite unit, they kind of felt like they were a bit untouchable in a sense. That all these cases raise huge questions really about, how we need to scrutinise these and how it has to be accessible not just to an appointed commissioner or somebody, but to a more democratic process.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to throw this out, the discussion out to you all to ask questions. As the great historian Doris Kearns-Goodwin always says at these moments, she says, I'll accept any questions in the form of questions. So we've got a roving mic or two to go around. So if you have any questions in the form of questions for Kate or Eleanor or Harriet, now is the time. And Tom will bring it.
Hi, this might sound like a really obvious question. I've read lots of the coverage and I'm really interested, but I still can't understand why they did it. Why did they do it?
It's not a bad question. I mean, I think one of the things that we're seeing in the material, in the disclosure that we get, so I mean, there's multiple layers of answers to that question. I mean, on the one end, you have the kind of deep state political policing that starts in 1968 after the Grosvenor Square riot. Well, I say it starts in it probably doesn't start in 1968. Like the part of it that we've been involved in uncovering starts in 1968 when they set up the Special Demonstration Squad, and they start spying basically on the entire left. Like there's over 1,000 groups over a 50-year period that they were spying on. But then on the other end of it, you've got these police units who Mark had a job, his boss had a job, his boss's boss had a job, and so once these units exist, then they all want to keep their jobs, and so then it becomes this kind of self-tasking, self-justifying, often slightly ridiculous spying operation that is kind of far more mundane and bureaucratic and just about keeping all these people in jobs. So yeah, I think there's a wide spectrum of answers to that question.
And another answer is just because they could, or because they can, because of the secrecy that we've talked about. They started it, and they just possibly. They would probably argue it was cost-effective way to police protest, but I think they knew all along that they should, if it had been uncovered in the public, we wouldn't have stood for it. The British public wouldn't have stood for it because it is inherently wrong. When I was an activist, I thought there would be undercover police in meetings, possibly in public meetings and on demonstrations. But I instinctively knew it was against my human rights that someone would actually be living with me, be my friend's boyfriend, and they knew that too. It is wrong, but because I guess it also shows the level of disdain they have for left-wing activists, and because it was, the secrecy just enabled them to carry it on.
Do you want? I can.
I'll pass it on. Hello, thanks very much for sharing what's happened to you. It's a very brave thing to do. I wondered what you hope for in terms of accountability and what your views are about the undercover policing inquiry, given how long that's been going on, and yet we're still at an early stage of hearing things and probably not hearing a lot of things that you think should be out in the open. I just wondered if you could comment on that.
I think public inquiries are what the British state does when they're backed into a corner, and they need to be shown to be doing something. And I don't think anybody had huge expectations of the public inquiry, but the reality is it is being a bit of a disaster for the police, and the amount of information that is coming out through the public inquiry and the evidence that all of these groups that they were spying on were basically on the right side of history. It's pretty embarrassing now the way they spied on, for example, the anti-apartheid movement or the women's liberation movement. And there was a woman officer interviewed who was one of the first, I think she was the first woman recruited to the Spycops group to spy on the women's liberation movement. And she was asked, what were they doing? And she said, well, they were campaigning around childcare and equal pay for women. And she was asked, well, were you paid the same as your male colleagues? And she said, no, I got 90% of what my male colleagues got because I was a woman. A lot of it is proving to be quite embarrassing for the police. But I think my main hope for it is just to get the information out there, and for social movements and political movements to be able to use that. And my hope is that it is useful for the resistance. It's not necessarily any kind of state accountability that is going to come out of it.
Yeah, I would hope, I mean, I have a bit of a blue sky thinking, is like, you know, the big aim is that the British public really starts to take notice of it, starts to be able to understand what this kind of, the political policing that it is part of is actually completely anti-democratic, and that, you know, we deserve to live in a country where young people, I know it's not all young people, but there's you know, a lot of young people where they are pointing out that there's something wrong with the system, that actually that we will they will then be listened to instead of treated like this and kind of you know, fought against by the police. But yeah, that's blue sky thinking.
I think we've got time for another couple of questions. Tom, there's someone here.
How far up did it go? Do you know how much the government knew at the time, and did you ever find out?
I mean, I'm sure there's a lot we will never know. And the public inquiry are being very careful to focus only on the police, only on what the police did in England and Wales, and only on the police from England and Wales. And I think there's a much bigger story out there. I mean, we've heard from Harriet about MI5. We know that MI5 were receiving all the reports from the Special Demonstration Squad. They had a something they called Box 500, which was where they put the reports that were going to MI5. And occasionally it comes up that, you know, some of these officers say, well, my reports were going all the way to the Home Office. Mark Kennedy claimed that his reports at one point were going across the desk of Tony Blair. But how much we will ever know about all of that, certainly through the public inquiry, is anybody's guess, really. I can't imagine they're keen.
I think there was certainly, because a lot of the tasking for the officers came from MI5, I think, you know, whatever the different departments were wanting to find out, it would come through the MI5 tasking. So we did find out in the inquiry that Margaret Thatcher was particularly interested in the Greenham women and what they were doing, and so that's why they ended up with an undercover policewoman there. And similarly, Michael Heseltine was interested in what they were doing in the CND in his seat, because they were going to stand against him, and he was kind of seriously worried about that, which is an interesting example. They spend the whole time in the public inquiry asking us about how we are trying to subvert democracy, and that's the main example of subverting democracy that's come out so far.
Thanks so much again. I just think it's really interesting. I mean, the fact that this all happened 25 years ago, and yet, you know, we're still seeing, you know, public participation, demonstrations being cracked down. I mean, I know that's not to do with spying, but it's all part of this whole, you know, reduction of the kind of, you know, private space, and so I was just wondering, to what extent are you aware of this kind of thing still going on, particularly now when you look at, you know, what's going on in the US about the police being, you know, used to further Trump's agenda, and how easy the police do become, you know, arms of the state like that, and can happen, you know, overnight, that they're suddenly really dangerous for, you know, the public at large. So, you know, what kind of spying is going on now that you're aware of?
Any takers?
I mean, in terms of, so we talk mainly about spying on protest groups, and I think ostensibly when we first set up, when the SDS was first set up, It was on the back of concerns around the really huge protests around Vietnam War, and it was really to sort of try and gather some intelligence. To answer the first question, really, to be on the face of it, to be able to better police protests so it didn't get out of control. But of course, what then happens is it becomes this whole self-fulfilling kind of organisation that's no longer, just does its own thing, and it just sort of then chooses all sorts of groups, including, family justice campaigns and, people who are, kind of holding the police accountable, and so it becomes something else. I think probably the way in which protest is policed is different because we're in a digital age now, and we probably don't need to put people so deep undercover in the way that did happen. But I think the public inquiry is mainly focusing on what's coming out is mostly around left-wing and environmental activists, but we know that undercover policing is being used in all sorts of different ways, and in terms of perhaps much more legitimate targets like organised crime. The kind of questions, though, to ask about that are really about the extent to which those officers are being monitored and controlled, and whether officers are allowed to go and have kind of form these deep intimate relationships with women and that they're spying on, and how it's sort of the behaviour of undercover officers in whatever they're doing. And there are undercover officers who are looking at the far right as well. And we don't hear about that because, funnily enough, the far right people who are spied on haven't come forward to complain about it. But we know they're used in lots of different ways. And I suppose I'm guessing that there's much more use of digital technical surveillance now without that need, but that kind of much deeper spying is still something that happens in lots of different ways and places, and it needs to be subject to proper regulation at the very least.
I mean, there's something that we're hearing over and over again from the officers who are giving evidence in the public inquiry. They're asked about the most morally reprehensible things that they did, and the incredibly trivial things that they did as well. And they repeatedly answer, well, I never thought whether that would hurt her, or I never thought about whether that was right or wrong, because we thought no one would ever find out. We assumed no one would ever know. And I think that there is something very dangerous about undercover policing, wherever it is, whatever it's being used for, because you take officers out of all the ordinary moral controls that people have in their lives, their social circles, their families. You give them a false name, and you give them the backing of an entire police unit, and you tell them that no one will ever know what they did. And we've seen time and time again that it brings out the worst in people, and it's not really surprising. I think another thing that the inquiry is not really looking at, and that we wish that they would look into more carefully, is the question of private spies, corporate spies. We know that there were corporate spies at the same time as these police spies. People were uncovered in the campaign against the arms trade, working for British Aerospace. There were spies, I believe, working for E.ON, spying on the climate movement. And the police have said, since our case came out, they've said, well, we're not spying on protest movements anymore. And my immediate thought was, right, so who are you paying to do it for you? And I think that it's worrying, because there are even less controls on the private sector than you would have on the police. So, and I remember in 2020, when I was just starting to go through the disclosure, there was a Southeast counter-terror guidebook got leaked to the press. And it included the Fridays for Future, the school children who were striking around climate change, and it included Extinction Rebellion on its list of extremist groups in the southeast counter-terror region. And when that got leaked, they said, oops, that was a mistake, we didn't mean to put that on there. But I don't think you can print an entire page of a counter-terror manual by mistake. So I think they are quite clearly still targeting these protest groups. That said, I don't do these talks to spread paranoia, and so I think that it is important to understand that this stuff happens, but I think it's also worth saying that when I first got involved in protests, they were proposing the criminal justice bill, and everyone was saying, they're cracking down on protests, this is the end of what we're doing, and for me that was the beginning. They're still cracking down on protests, and there are still people out there on the streets fighting back, and I think that's really important. So I don't want people to be put off by what we have to say.
Well, I think that wonderfully eloquent overview is a good place for us to end. Kate will be signing copies of the book up there at the bookstore, which is being sold by the Stoke Newington bookstore there. You're also urged to sign the Police Spies Out of Our Lives petition, which is also at the back of the room. And I just want to thank you once again for coming. I can't praise Disclosure high enough. It's very moving, it's very witty, and it reads like at times like a psychological thriller combined with a very astute sort of political novel. It's a really wonderful read. So please join me once more in thanking Kate Wilson, Eleanor Fabreda, and Harriet Lister.
I'm not at all. So I'm not too